Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Erin, and I'll be helping to guide you through the session. We're excited to have you join us, and the webinar will run approximately 30 minutes of content, followed by 10 minutes for a Q&A at the end. I will stop talking now, and I will hand it over to Martin. So over to you, Martin.
Oh, thank you, Erin. And now my Harry Mai, Kia ora, and a very good afternoon to you wherever you are in the world today. I'm Martin Wright, and in case you were wondering, if you have clicked on the right link, this is Navigating Ethical AI in Business. And what I want to do today is do a bit of a practical framework for leaders as we know where things stand at the moment. And I'll just run through the brief agenda now so we know where we're going. As you can see, we've got the introduction, and that will be very, very quick. But what I want to get into is understanding the ethical landscape, and then what's happening in the UK and where is that heading. And then, of course, building ethical AI governance. Some case studies around the pluses and the minuses of what's going on in the whole concept of AI and ethics. And then we'll think about, okay, how do I actually assess my risk? And also, how do I actually keep my stakeholders actually engaged, both internal and external? And then, as we said, about the 30-minute mark in, there'll then be the Q&A, the most important stuff. What is keeping you up at night when it comes to AI? Let's get underway. I'm Martin Wright. And you think, well, why is Martin Wright talking about AI and ethics? I've been involved quite heavily in IT and AI over most of my career. And whilst I have done a lot of work in learning and development, I've also been a leader. I also have a master's in information systems a few years ago now, but it's a case of this whole thing around what AI is really does interest me. And also in the courses that I'm running across leadership and sales and all these other subjects, it's one thing that keeps coming up is, what about AI? What are we doing? And therefore, that's always really piqued my interest. And that's why I'm here today, because getting the ethics piece right for me is probably the most important thing. Let's think about AI and it being your competitive advantage. Of course, ethics. For those of you who have done any sort of study at either high school or university and have sat in Ethics 101 are probably thinking, oh, this is the dullest subject on earth. And it's sort of like, not really. When people talk about ethics and when we think about what ethics is and what it can be, this then also then really raises the question of, isn't ethics just about being nice? And it's a case of, well, actually, it's a bit more than that. In business, and this is the thing that we are really focusing on here, in business, it's about your insurance. It's about protecting your business and making it better rather than leaving it to, I think, we'll worry about that later. And why is this a real problem at the moment? AI is in its mass evolution. We're seeing, some people, I'm not quite keen on the phrase, but people use the AI Wild West in that people are just going off and doing their own thing. And of course, it's working at a pace that we've never seen before in terms of technology and how things actually work. And this is the really, really key point. How do we actually work around this responsibly within business context? The thing that I am now starting to hear more of is that I've been talking to senior leaders, and some are saying by actually having an ethical approach, and whilst it's not fully formed and not yet perfect, it's actually getting us more business because people are actually thinking and saying, we can trust these people and we're not just letting the AI go off and do whatever we think it does. There is some sort of like handle around it and some sort of like idea of how we actually manage AI to everybody's advantage and also to protect your business. In the next 30 minutes or so, I want to give you some ideas that could be your own AI ethical toolkit. And also as well, I know that many of you are already using AI and some have made great strides and are deploying in some fabulously innovative ways. That also is one of the key things I want to talk about today as well, is that ethics and AI isn't a wet blanket. I've had some very interesting conversations with some leaders where they've been actually really quite sort of like, you're stopping me from actually progressing, and you're just a naysayer, a doomsayer, and all that sort of stuff. And also that's one thing in my journey around AI and ethics that I really want to try and share with you as well, is that if you are the ambassador for this particular subject in your business. It's how you sell it. It's how you position it, that it's taking things forward and taking them forward well, rather than dampening things or say, oh, we can't do this. It's the actual opposite. So I want you to bear that in mind as we go through these next few slides in terms of, okay, how can I position this in my business? Or if you already have AI ethics in your business, awesome stuff, but what needs refining? What could be added? What could be fine-tuned as well? So we're all learning together. The way that the technology is progressing at probably the most phenomenal rate that we've ever seen, if we think back sort of like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, when we've seen how IT and computers and technology have evolved, we're now going at probably 10 times the pace. So it is still a journey for us all. What keeps me up at night? Well, quite a lot of things. However, in terms of sort of like, okay, what are businesses doing and how it actually, how do we keep people on track? Okay, how do we protect business, its integrity, and more importantly, its trust with not only its internal populations and employees, but also its customers. And also then that wider environment of we're all in the world. And of course, when things go wrong, everybody starts, our trust in things starts to erode. The pillars I've got up on screen, and there are 5, some do sound very similar. Okay, and that's okay, because what I'm trying to do is say, right, okay, to stop your AI house falling down, what sort of things do you need? And if you build your own pillars of AI ethics, please go ahead and do so. You may only have 2 or 3. That's okay. It's more about the questions that these 5 things pose that I'd really like you to think about in your business. I'm going to dive in and go into the first one then of fairness and non-discrimination, and then we'll walk through the other 4 as we go. Fairness and non-discrimination. Some interesting cases have appeared over recent years, of course, as AI is evolving, regarding sort of like when things go wrong in AI. And one really good example of when things didn't quite work as they should have done was with Amazon in the US, who created a whole recruitment AI platform. And the whole idea was, okay, we're building this so we hire the best people. So in principle, that sounds like an absolutely brilliant thing to do. However, of course, the system was working on historical data, on data in general. And the interesting thing was that for the more technical roles, the CVs started to actually downgrade female applicants and promote male applicants. And it's to do with bias and what had happened before. So therefore, in terms of, was anybody at fault? Not really. It was the way that the system and the way that large language models work, as because AI is trying to actually replicate how humans think, it then started creating this rather strange, and also rather disastrous anomalies in that male candidates were seen more so than female candidates. Now, Amazon scrapped the whole thing. It cost them a heck of a lot of money, and I mean millions of dollars. Also then, their reputation, and then their whole sort of like ability to actually, harvest and harness incredible talent was also damaged as well. Basically, your AI is only as fair as the data that you feed it, but are we actually checking and looking at what is going on? And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But the big question here is what we are doing, is it fair? And of course, in this case, in recruitment, of course, we have the Equality Act. So it's not just about being a nice to have here. From UK standards, of course, this is the law. So that was the first pillar. And I hope you're all still with me as I'm looking at a very tiny screen, but I'm sure that you are still there. Thank you so much once again for joining. The second pillar. Computer says no. This whole idea of transparency and explainability. I've actually experienced this myself quite recently, that I was declined something and I couldn't find out the reason why. And if anybody is here from O2, well, that will be a separate conversation for later on. But this was the whole point, that with AI, when we're talking about transparency, we've got to be able to explain why a decision was made. And of course, under GDPR, of course, here in the UK, we have the right to understand automated decisions that significantly affect us. With the AI you have and whatever you're doing, my question for you to ask everybody internally as well who is involved in your AI projects is, can we actually explain it in simple terms? And if you can't explain it in simple terms as to the reason why decisions are made and what actually happens, then maybe you can't deploy it. This is not about then sort of like saying everybody needs to be a technical expert, but can you give valid reasons for why your AI and how your AI makes decisions? So that's just something to think about. Kind of also blurring the lines a bit, but here we go, get more stuff to talk about with GDPR. Everybody's favorite topic. This is an interesting one, as we now have, with the evolution of AI, is this whole idea of, privacy and data protection, because AI eats data for breakfast. It's data hungry. So the challenge that we have for AI to work well, we need a lot of data. But of course, GDPR, on the other hand, is saying you only collect what you need. So yes, this one is going to be a challenge. Can we be creative? Can we be maybe less selective and depending on what we are doing with our AI? But here's the big question. Do we actually meet GDPR? And we're going to talk a little bit later about the wider elements of what UK legislation could potentially look like. But have we actually got this right? There have been cases in the US, and I'm using the US more so because these are ones that are quite public and dominant. For those of you who may have heard of Target, great big superstore type thing, had a massive campaign analysing shopping data. Now, this is nothing new. Constellation Wines is another great one when it was big data before AI came out. So Target were really keen to sort of like really focus on what shoppers' behaviour. And there was this really awkward scenario where a young woman was buying a pregnancy test at Target, and then all of a sudden, all these mailers around sort of like babies and all this other stuff started arriving at her home. And of course, this was an invasion of privacy because being pregnant is a personal thing and a person's choice. But yet now other people were in this household were aware that somebody was having a baby. I've kind of softened that a little bit because it did get a little bit gnarly and very, very awkward. But the point is sort of like, what are we actually doing with our data? And do we protect individuals, be it internal, external, and beyond, as a result of our actions? Here's the next thing when we talk about accountability and governance. And I put the title on there of who's driving this thing. Here's what happens when your AI system makes a mistake. Because yes, AI systems do. And this is something we really, really need to be cognizant of throughout in terms of if it makes a mistake, who's to blame? And is it the program itself? Is it the data scientist, the CEO? Is it the AI? And this is something that we've all got to be mindful of. Over time, we have to realize that there has to be accountability and governance. And the point of this is actually we need to make sure that everybody is accountable in some way, shape, or form. And also, everybody knows their roles within the AI infrastructure of who's looking after what, who's managing what. And also, if something does go wrong, okay, what do we address and what is the redress for those who may be impacted by it? So it's not a perfect world, and it's not about that your AI will be completely 100% watertight all of the time, because as I said, things are evolving. But it is about having some sort of structure in place when things are going maybe not as you want them to be able to say, right, okay, who is in the frame here that we can talk to actually ensure what they're accountable for. And also as well, what do we learn from anything that actually does happen? So that's 3 out of the 4. And then the 4th, accountability and governance is that whole sort of like overarching piece within your whole AI thing. But then there's the more day-to-day stuff. And this is probably one of the most important things that I talk about a lot on all the AI courses I run with InPD. That was a shameless plug, and there'll be more on that later. But it is something we are really trying to get everybody encouraged and involved in, is that there needs to be a human in the loop, not just at that governance level, but that actually on a more daily, day-to-day type operation. This is one interesting thing as well that I'm seeing a lot within businesses is that everybody's so excited by AI. And I equate it to being sort of like, your first true love. You're completely, infatuated and you can't see anything wrong. And so therefore we are believing a lot more about what AI can do because we're seeing some really brilliant tangible results and therefore we believe it. And this is something very, very interesting that even the head of Microsoft has started to talk about AI psychosis. And thankfully that's more on an individual level, not on a business level, but it does lead to this bigger question of, are we just getting lazy because AI is giving us the answers and we can't be bothered to check? I actually don't think so. I've been working, say, around sort of like data and information systems for quite a long time. We even talked about information anxiety back in the 1990s. This is the problem. Have we just now got so overwhelmed that we just think, yeah, that'll do. That looks right. That's great. And this is the thing that I'd really want to try and emphasize is that what systems do we have in place ethically, okay, and practically to make sure that we are actually keeping a check on what our AI is doing. Because remember, AI isn't perfect. Whilst we talk about artificial intelligence, it's more augmented intelligence. And because it's learning on what it sees and is making maybe assumptions and things, which is great, is it making the right ones? And do we have the guardrails in place? Those are the 5 pillars, the 5 key things that you need to really ask when you're looking at your AI and you're thinking about, does this hold up? Are we doing the right thing by ourselves, by our business, by our customers and that wider world? But then we've got the UK regulatory framework. Interestingly, this is all based on a white paper and there are 5 key elements. I know there's 6 on screen, the 6 I'll come to in a moment. The UK has taken the approach of rather than trying to actually have hard cast iron legislation, it realizes, of course, that with the evolution of AI, it can't keep up. So it has then presented principles. And these principles are human oversight, transparency, fairness, accountability and contestability and redress. So does this sound familiar? Well, the answer is yes. And the 5 pillars I've talked about earlier in how you set your stall out in AI and ethics is based around what the general overarching principles are within the United Kingdom. And the nice thing, and that 6th point that sits there on the screen is this, in that you do actually see guidance from your own profession. So a good example is the Financial Conduct Authority, which has some really, really good and rigorous policies and rules around what we can do within AI. Same goes for ACAS, for HR, and there are quite a few now emerging who are also now trying to say, okay, in addition to these principles, here's some of the best practice or things that have to be done, because of course we have all sorts of laws and legislations that we also navigate, but this is how we should approach it in our sector. A question to everybody is that if you are following these and you are plugged into your sector sort of like knowledge base and governance or whatever that is, then you're definitely on the right lines. What I do want to just actually then flag is, whilst that's sort of like what we should be doing now, we also need to be able to actually say, right, well, what's coming up? What is on the horizon? A few things on screen. So UK legislation. I'm using the word legislation because we're now starting to see this movement towards there being a bill, and early estimates are suggesting it could be around April, May of 2026. And what is it doing? Well, at the moment, looking at all the legal websites, which, trust me, is a fun thing to do, trying to work out where is this going to land. Copyright is probably one of the key things that's going to come out in terms of who owns what, who should be remunerated, but also as well, who is going to be responsible. And remember, of course, it's a bill that's being presented. Before it gets passed, it's got to go through many iterations and debates, etc., but it is coming up. And my counsel, as meager as it would be, is keep an eye out as to where is this going to land. It will take time to become law, which also gives everybody time, if you need to get your house in order, but it is something to watch for. And of course, it's probably going to struggle, as I've mentioned previously, the evolution of AI means that what we're looking at in 2025, 2026 may be something quite different by 2027, 28, and maybe beyond. One good place to look at, though, in terms of, okay, well, what does legislation look like is the EU AIA, European AI Act, that actually has triaged it into sort of like absolutely unacceptable, high risk, medium risk, and low risk items. What I do suggest is, rather than me bore you to tears with the EU AIA, here's just a couple of things. If you have European customers or clients, trust me, it does apply to you, even if you are in the UK, because you are dealing with a European Union citizen or entity. Be mindful of it. Rather than try and read the whole act, which, trust me, is quite big, I suggest that you use an AI prompt in one of your favorite tools and actually ask for a summary, and with the prompt in there, say, with relation to your particular sector or the types of business that you're doing. USA and China, slightly different systems altogether. The USA is a lot more loose and has more leanings towards how the UK is thinking. China, on the other hand, has gone down a far more stricter regulatory approach. The point of all of this is that it is a global thing, and we've all got some responsibility because data is out there and it is everywhere. One final point on this slide is this whole idea of ISO. And for those of you who are familiar with quality and systems and stuff, ISO seems to be a very good leader in getting some sort of rigor around how your AI works and operates, and has a really good ethical component. And I believe it's ISO 42001 is the leading thing in this. Yes, it comes with a price tag, but also, as ISO accredited organizations, does this or could this give you more access into more markets because you have that kite mark? Very quickly then, how do we implement this? Talked about an ethics committee, and of course, as soon as maybe that's not the best words to use, because I'm sure those things have put fear and dread in most businesses. But look at it like this, as an opportunity for innovation as well as actual governance and fairness and all the things that we've talked about. Have a mix of people. Usually it's the tech people who get landed with everything. Make sure that you've got a spread of people who can also ask sometimes maybe the awkward questions, but also keeping your C-suite well involved. Briefly, looking at that whole idea of impact and risk. Okay, the impact in terms of sort of like, okay, what's this AI actually doing and what could go wrong? And if it does go wrong, how do we fix it? If you can't answer those questions, I would say, okay, have a little bit of a rethink before you head towards deployment. And the traffic light system, similar to what the EU is looking at in terms of the high, the medium, and the low risk. What sort of data are we working with? Where would you actually rank it? And if it has a higher risk, folks, risk does not mean do not do it. If it's got a high risk, what have you got wrapped around it? Because it's your business. And if it is high risk, that's great. Make sure that you have the right mechanisms in place to be able to actually manage that. One key thing I'm seeing a lot of is that everybody thinks that, okay, yeah, right, we'll put a policy in and it goes in the drawer and we look at it in maybe in a year's time. It's not one and done. And that's something that I would really stress as well, that it is a changing environment. And it's not just about, is this particular agent talking to that particular agent? Beyond the technical in terms of accuracy, are we still looking at that fairness piece, if that's applicable? And also, are we looking at the actual outputs to make sure that AI isn't doing anything rogue, that we're not seeing hallucinations and all these other things that AI has the potential to do? If you're buying ethically, of course you should be buying ethically. You can't do this all on your own, which is at the moment, everybody's trying to play around and do their own thing, which is great. That's how that's what innovation's about. But there will come a point where you do need experts. And here's a few questions, two in particular. Have you got an ethics policy? And also, going back to that whole thing around explainability and transparency, can you explain how this AI makes decisions? There's a lot of talk of the whole black box piece, and it's seriously, black box means we've no idea how it works, but it does magic. I'd always see that as a bit of a red flag, because somewhere behind the scenes something is happening, and if you are the ones using this AI and something does go awry, how are you going to explain it? Very quickly, Lloyds Bank and the NHS have done really, really well in actually pioneering what good ethical AI looks like. And Lloyd's, the key message here is that ethics was part of that design to start with. The NHS, in terms of being able to do diagnosis and actually patients at the centre of what was going on, has really driven a lot of innovation within the healthcare sector. And also in terms of AI and analysis and how we can work things and how AI learns, healthcare is a really, really important area where we can make some brilliant innovative inroads and actually save and help people's lives. On the other hand, the government of the Netherlands has a system called Siri, and Siri unfortunately started to flag people from certain ethnic backgrounds and certain postcodes in the Netherlands, and it was there to actually stop benefit fraud, but it started to actually, as it was learning, actually started to then discriminate. And now this was a few years ago now, and surprisingly enough, the system has had to be changed. But what its intent was in terms of fraud detection, absolutely fine with that, then actually meant that families were torn apart, children were taken away from their parents, and it all got really, really messy. Focus on the success that if you think about where the NHS and Lloyd's are, this is a good model to actually work with. Finally, it's all about telling people what you're doing with AI. If you're trying to build that trust, and if you have got a chatbot, tell your customers or your internal teams it's a chatbot, but there is a human at the end if you can't get the answers that you need. And also, don't just bury your AI experience in a 50-page sort of like annual report. Think about how you actually communicate what you're doing with AI in terms of success, and also as well when things aren't going well and something happens, are you in front of it to be able to talk about and explain what you're doing to fix it? Right, well, that was 33 and a half minutes of talking, and I am going to stop sharing for the moment. And may I ask if there is anybody still out there in Cyberland, does anybody have any questions?
The question is, how receptive do you see the business environment to observation of ethical considerations in the strategies and day-to-day operations? We know about these foundations everywhere. Yeah. There's plenty of the material around. But what is not obvious is what is the general attitude, either in the UK or broader context, to business following the bottom line or suddenly changing tack and becoming more socially responsible and ethical?
Okay, that's a question I get a lot in various shapes and forms. I'd always say go back to that whole thing of, okay, this is your insurance policy. And rather than it being a deterrent, it goes back to that whole thing that we saw with Lloyd's Bank in terms of, is the ethical piece, and by business ethics saying, right thing, not breaking the law, and does it help customer trust? If you can position those three things, then it's actually then trying to actually drive the innovation rather than inhibit it. Because I have gone down the route of saying ethics is really important in business, and I've had business leaders actually ask me to leave the room because it's sort of saying no. And it's a case of, right, it's how we actually position ethics and how we actually sell it. And that's why things like the ISOs of this world, not that I'm saying everybody should do ISO, but it's like saying, right, okay, if something went wrong, okay, because we're protecting our business, we're trying to make it better. If something went wrong, have we got something that we can work with and point to say, this is how we fix it, or this is the standards and the things that we've put in place? That, I think, is going to get more business appetite over time, rather than saying, oh, no, you shouldn't be doing that. It's a case of, no, it needs to be a collaborative and very much a positive approach rather than, I say, the wet blanket. Thank you. Good question. Anybody else?
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you, Martin, for that. That's really so good, so helpful. I think for me, I'm looking at it from the point of view of the government side of things. Obviously, yeah, we know the speed at which everything is moving, but I just think the government we've got at the moment, we've got like a technology department and so on. But I'm sort of thinking to myself, well, do you think it should be more of a cross-government thing? So it's not just one government department that's doing tech, but like across, whether it's Department of Education or the Department for Health or Defence, that there's some sort of join up across, because I'm just thinking of all the ways that AI is impacting all these different levels. And I know different governments across the world will have different approaches, but I'm just sort of thinking, like, your advice or your thoughts on that sort of approach.
Well, I feel honoured to be asked such a brilliant question. I do know that within Department of Education, from my own connections and also from the NHS, obviously another government institution, there is AI happening. Is there a cross sort of like, cross government, public sector approach? I think there needs to be. And I think there are some inroads towards it, but it's how do we coordinate it? Because everybody's trying to do different things. I think it would be good for some sort of like, cross sector, what's our baseline? Bearing in mind GDPR, equality, and the potential legislation that's coming up. That's going to be a really, really interesting thing to actually see. And I would certainly promote it. And I think that it's happening, but it's just not publicised enough. I think that there maybe needs to be a central voice, because I think there's a lot we can leverage from education into defence, into health. There are common themes that we can actually utilise, and especially in public sector, because I actually was in the public sector in New Zealand for a few years as well. We've got to be so mindful around the data that we use. So therefore, can we actually capitalise on our understanding and our knowledge and the lessons learnt, so we don't do the wrong thing for our particular sort of like government department. Dan, I see that you have a question, and thank you for that, on how they should approach the issue of copyright. It still is unresolved in legal terms. I have been looking at a few legal blogs, and I'm keeping literally every other week. I'm trying to get an update as to what does this look like? Can we get any more information? I think in terms of where we stand at the moment, have you got an audit trail for who has done what? Is there some sort of like, structure to how things were created? Who did it? Have we got any validity in terms of timestamp, in terms of IP? I would try and keep a track of things like that and the current state of play, so that when we do see more things evolve around copyright, you do have some sort of like electronic paper trail that does reflect that. There was a couple more slides I wanted to show. Some recent questions. Say we have actually talked about some of those, but I just wanted to flag and highlight that yes, InPD, we do offer a range of courses that do a far deeper dive, not just into the ethics and people like me talking, but experts from across various industries. And we have a great series of programs already in 2025 in our AI hub. So we have finance directors, OD and HR, construction, managers, sales, and also we have an executive mini MBA. So please look at our website for more information, and the InPD team will be contacting you if you have any questions. And finally, I want to say a massive thank you. I know we stretched slightly over our 40 minutes, and I appreciate you sticking with it. If you have any questions, it's m.wright@inpd.co.uk, or follow me on LinkedIn. It's Martin P. Wright. I'm relatively easy to find. As we are now over time, is there any final questions before we call it a day today?
I was going to ask again, are there any particular, I know there's, again, so much going on, but sources of information or people to follow? Because, again, there's so much going on. Everyone's saying this and saying that. And I think that's where I'm struggling at times, to sort of make sure that you're ignoring the noise, but, the ones who really know what they're talking about, or a good sort of, thought leaders and so on in AI in general.
The list of bookmarks and things I've got going on is quite extensive. I always actually look at the government websites. Just thinking about your sector as well, I would always, Department for Innovation in the UK, Business Innovation is always one to keep an eye out on. Also, I would recommend this. Do you like prompting, Esther? AI prompting?
Yeah.
I suggest the following. Choose your favourite flavour, be it ChatGPT, Perplexity, and actually write in a prompt saying, can you give me the latest that is relevant for my sector? Because also I've got to be mindful, I can't be particularly biased, because if I have a favourite, then it all goes horribly wrong. But I keep mixing up my AI prompts as well, and also the actual types of thing I actually look at. If I'm not happy with what I get out of ChatGPT, I'll put it into Gemini, saying improve it. Not happy with that. Also, Perplexity, personal favorite, because it has a lot more academic references. Remember, it's AI, it's not perfect, so it needs checking. But build yourself a prompt. A nice way of explaining how AI works for people who maybe don't know a lot is a site called Futurepedia on YouTube. They do some brilliant sort of like videos on how to build an AI agent. And even me, I think even after maybe a couple more goes round, I could probably give it a shot. So you don't need to be a programmer, but it helps actually build out the technical side, because you need a little bit of understanding to be able to then build the whole thing of, right, okay, if I'm making ethical decisions, where's that data coming from and what am I doing with it and all that sort of stuff. So it adds a lot more context. Does that help?
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, and thank you for being on camera, and thank you for asking an amazing question. I really appreciate it. I'd like to say on behalf of InPD, and especially Erin, without whom we could have not made this work at all, thank you so much for engaging with us. We really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and who knows, I'll see you on the next webinar soon. Take care now. Goodbye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.